Baruch haba b'Shem Yahuwah. This is Revealing the Word. Today we are going to take a journey together and discover the hidden word of Yahuwah. So put on your broad-brimmed hats and get ready to excavate the word with us, because we Shema Elohim with you. Shalom, this is your host, Jessica Arianis of Ha-Kol Kala Radio, and my special co-host, Eric Bissell. In this episode of Revealing the Word, we are going to discuss the origin of language and the importance of knowing how Yahuwah communicates. With me now is my co-host, Eric Bissell. Shalom, Eric.
Shalom, Jessica. This is a great day. We're doing the broadcast finally. We've been wanting this, and it's always a wonderful day when we have the chance to project across the face of the earth the Shem Yahweh, his words, and they lift up his name and say,
Yes.
hey, this is the one who we trust in, that we have relationship with, that we're going to be spending eternity with, and we're going to be talking about his stuff, his things, his matters, his devarim.
The matters of his heart, yes. We're engaging in dialogue, which I think really is the essence of what Yahushua came to do, which was to restore the breach or to be a bridge to the chasm so that we could cross over and come back into a proper covenant that is mouth to mouth, face to face, and have proper dialogue. I believe in this hour, Yahuwah, in his infinite mercy, his great compassion for us, is restoring the line of communication.
That's right. If you go to Eriktology, spelled Eriktology, if you go on YouTube, there's a number of different things that are various different talks, as well as a 60-hour class that we did back in 2011. Let me just say that what we're talking about here is not about me or you, it's about words. And so this word Eriktology, that's a sound, the word Eric. Well, there's 3 different ways you could spell that word, and each one of them means something in Hebrew. But if you look at, and I know we haven't gone through the letters yet, but if you look at Ayin Resh Kaf, it's basically pronounced Eric, and it means to assess, to evaluate, to determine something's worth that you otherwise had no regard of. For example, in your introduction here, you talk about put on your broad brim hats. Well, that's what an archaeologist does. And if you were just out walking around and you saw a rock and you didn't think of it as being valuable, but if you go, wait a minute, I suspect there's something about this rock, and you look at it that it's actually a piece of geological resource, say a particular type of rock, or perhaps it's an artifact. If you look closer, you'll see that it's really something of great interest or something of great value. That's literally what the word Ayin Resh Kaf means. If you are an appraiser of a house or a piece of jewelry or something that somebody doesn't know what it's worth, you make it your mission, your job, to go out and figure out what's really going on with this particular thing, and then express it into words that somebody else can realize its value. That's what the word Eric is all about. So Eriktology is the study of things that we had no regard for, that by seeing that these words and letters are actually not only the voice of Yahuwah, but Yahuwah's face and his heart. And these words and letters are the Mashiach himself. That's what Eriktology is about.
And if you want, you can access some of those teachings on YouTube. You can go to Mountain Air, AIRE 7, Mountain Air 7. I think it's the number 7, yeah, the digit 7, and that's accessible on YouTube. Or you can reach Eric Bissell on Facebook under Eric, ERIC, Bissell, BISSELL, or you can go to our website or to my website at hakolkalaministries.org. That's HAKOLKALLAH ministries.org. And you can access these teachings if you're not able to tune in live every week. Be sure to know that we are uploading our podcasts once they are broadcasted on Messianic Lamb Radio. Then we will podcast them on the website. You can access them. I will do my best to try to make the notes available. They are not always available, but I will do my best to do that for you. If you want to follow along, you can pull up some of our resources, I will have the resources available on the website also. Some of those resources that we mentioned in our last show were the Strong's Concordance that we will be using. We do not rely solely on these resources. They are exactly that. They are resources and they aid in our excavation or in our discovery. But the Word of Yahuwah is our firm foundation. So we also use the Ernest Klein etymological dictionary of the Hebrew language, which is published by Carta Jerusalem. We will also be using in this series the BDB, which is the Brown Drivers and Briggs. That's the BDB, Brown Driver Briggs, as well as the AHLB, which is the Ancient Hebrew Lexicon of the Bible. I think that's by Jeff Benner. Again, if you want to contact us, you can go to Facebook. You can access us by our tag names, HaKolKalamMinistries.org or Eric Bissell. This is episode 102 of the Revealing the Word series. And last week we discussed what it means to initiate dialogue, and we laid the foundation of communication, which in our opinion is to hear. And we know that just one of the attributes that separates him from other mighty ones, or how does Eric say, Elohim Achrim, right?
That's right.
Elohim Achrim. Okay. What differentiates him or sets him apart is that he is able to engage. He's living. He's alive. And because of that, there is a dialogue. So before we can even get into the language or the a structural overview of Semitic language or any language for that matter, before we can learn to master the Hebrew lip or the Paleo lip, we first have to know how to hear. And with that comes reciprocity. So we are not just to hear the word of Yahuwah, but know, I mean, really get it deep down in you with a form of accountability that he hears us also. There is a dialogue, a correspondence that's taking place here. And so our words are not falling on deaf ears. So his word should not fall on deaf ears. And his word is life. It's sustaining, it's invigorating, it quickens the soul, it revives, restores, and resurrects. And this is the words of Shaul, who says, if you've died with Moshiach, if you are in fact dead in Moshiach, then you have the promise of also being raised up. The very power that raised him up shall also raise you up. So we know that we are no longer dead in our transgressions, but because the word is being revealed, it is resurrecting us. It is bringing life to us. It is causing the womb to be restored so that we might produce after his kind, the Etz Chaim, the tree of life. So last week, again, we discussed what it is to Shema, to hear, and then to be accountable for what we hear. Right, Eric?
We have to listen to every word he said and be found doing it.
Right.
I remember hearing once, many years ago, someone brought the point up, going to church, they were saying, if someone were to bring you to court and try you for being a Christian, would there be any evidence or enough evidence to convict you? Well, along the similar lines, if Yahweh says, according to what I hear you saying, this is what is happening to you. And we can say, oh, that's not fair. That's not right. Really? Let's go back and look at the evidence. What are we doing? What are we saying? What are we believing? What are we hearing? What is the substance of our life? What exactly is happening?
Responding to.
So the interesting thing, when I say, would there be enough evidence to convict you of such and such? You could say, well, people say, well, come on, he knows my heart. That's good enough. Let's just leave it there. The scripture tells us that the human heart is desperately wicked, and who can know it? Well, he knows my heart. It's desperately wicked. Well, do we know his heart? You could say, well, yeah, I know him. Well, who is he? If you had to write a definition for who he is, well, Yeshua at one point is going to, I think it's in Matthew 24, he's going to lump a whole bunch of people on one side and then a whole bunch of people on the other side. And he's going to say to some, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who work iniquity. And that word iniquity in Greek is anomio. The prefix a means against or contrary or a different. And then the nomio is where we get the word nominal or name. A different name or contrary to the Shem, which is as we said last week, his name, his fame, his reputation, his occupation, or where he's at. Those of you who are worshiping or serving a deity of a different Shem, I never knew you. And they're going to say, Lord, Lord, of course you know us. We worship you, we sang songs to you, we prayed to you, we have faith in you, and we trusted that we would spend eternity with you. And yet he says, I never knew you? What's going on here? So you could say, where's the testimony and the witness of his identity? Well, if you look in Hebrew, there's a simple two-letter word spelled ayin dalet, ed. It means witness and testimony. And so one of the things we're going to be doing in these talks of this radio show is looking at individual Hebrew words and opening them up to see what's inside. There's a word that's typically translated as festival, which is moed, which literally means the place of witness, or this is where the testimony is found. And so if we just think, oh, those are Jewish holidays, those are the feasts of the people of the Old Testament, that's a bad rendering of what that word really means. It's really the place where is the testimony and witness of his identity, of his heart. And so just to go back and look at the festivals, the Moedim, is because they identify him who we serve. They are the things that say, this is Yahuwah. It's a matter of saying, we're going back to look at his instructions because it's who he is. It's where he's at. And we want to be found being those who are keeping his instructions because that identifies us as being in relationship with the one that those things identify being his witness and testimony.
Well, you mentioned that word iniquity, and that word iniquity, even in the Greek, that word iniquity has two forms. It takes on two forms. And the one that you mentioned, anomia, it means a violation of the law or a breach in contract, which leads to wickedness. And then we also have the word for iniquity, we have adikia, and it means also a legal injustice. So it means an infraction of the law. So I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, well, wait a second. So this is iniquity, to violate the law. So, but what law? Because what I found is that there were certain elements to my faith that didn't require much. Like, I wasn't going to be held accountable for very much. I could just kind of saved by grace, and that grace, was the ability to kind of mess up and just dust myself off and keep going, which in fact it is. I mean, it does. It gives you the opportunity to make mistakes and to grow and to learn from them. But as I begin to progress in this journey and begin to love the truth more than my own understanding, I started discovering that, wait a second, there's more to this than I thought. And I am extremely accountable for not only what I do, but more importantly, what I say. And that words are life, and that everything was spoken and came about because Yahuwah spoke. He brought it into existence by his word and through his word. And if there's power in that, then there's power in what I speak. I mean, the word tells us there's life and death. It's in the power of the tongue. Whoa, wait a second. So there's a weight here. It's very cumbersome to know that what we speak and how we speak and what actually comes out of that. Remember, it's not what goes in your mouth, but what comes out of your mouth that defiles a person. And so again, as I took this journey in and I began to have a zeal and a respect for the language, I began to realize that there was something more to this contract or this law, this idea of law. And I realized, wait a second, I used to work for HSBC Bank, or I used to work for the financial institution, and I was working in the legal department for the foreclosure specialist, and we were preparing legal documents for attorneys. And it was there that I realized, Eric, that wait a second, this language, this contract, these mortgage contracts in which these people came in agreement with, the majority of these people were going to lose their homes because they didn't understand the language in which their contract was written. Okay. And as I'm in quality control, I'm in the legal department. I have to look up every jot, every tittle, every I, every T, and I have to make sure that everything's in order so that they can actually pass judgment against these individuals for not keeping their part of the contract and repossess their property. And so I'm saying, wow, if only the people read their contract, if they only understood their rights, if they only understood the language that is written, but the language was so complicated. And I remember having huge dictionaries and a bunch of links and resources that we could access in order to understand the language ourselves. And imagine, I was trained in this department, so or in this field. So I'm thinking, wow, if it's difficult for us and we've been employed to understand it, imagine how much more difficult it is for those who just simply signed the contract and said, okay, give me the home under these terms, and sure, we get to live here. But now they're going to lose their homes. And so I started thinking, how much more important is it for us to understand our contract? Because the day will come when the anti-Messiah rises up, and there are many, will rise up to foreclose upon us and say, you're in debt to me. I own you. You're my property, and I'm going to foreclose upon you. And why? Because we don't understand the language in which our contract was written. And if Yahuwah is a sovereign and we are citizens in his kingdom, then it would behoove us to learn the language in which our contract was written. Why? Because there are promises there that will protect us and that will keep us. But there are also curses. There are elements within our contract that will either benefit us or work against us. And so in this series, we are going to do our best to not only establish a firm foundation in the original language, which we believe was Hebrew, the Hebrew tongue, or the Paleo language, or the Paleo tongue. We're going to establish that and try to encourage you and stimulate you and hopefully provoke an appetite in you so that you too will want to dig it up. Look, search it out so that you too can have the authority that is hidden in his word. The power and the authority is in his word.
Jessica, last time we mentioned that the voice of the bride was something that was talked about in Malachi 3:16 and verses 13 to 18. We went over that. Malachi in the King James Bible is the last book of the Old Testament. In the Hebrew Tanakh, it's organized a little differently. But one of the other last verses, there's a total of 24 verses. Verse 22 says, "Remember the Torah of Moshe my servant, which I commanded him at Horeb for all Israel, decrees and statutes." So there's a certain frame of mind that says, it's a different covenant. We don't have to deal with that. So we're not talking to people who don't want to regard these things. If you don't want to regard these things, fine, believe whatever you want to believe. But if you want to look back at these words and say, when he says, "Remember the Torah of Moshe, my servant, decrees and statutes that he gave for Israel," this particular study is for those of us who say, hey, I would like to be that people. I want to be Yahuwah's Kadoshi. Now, this word Kadosh is betrothed, is set apart, is very special attention, like no other. That's Kadosh. As a matter of fact, the Melachim, the angels, the cherubim who were going around the throne, they don't say, holy, holy, holy. What they say is Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. This word Kadosh is all they can say when they see the exhibition of mind-blowing, pure, awesome.
Splendor.
The only word that can come out of their mouth is Kadosh. We in English have no appreciation really of what this word means, but that's what Yahuwah calls his Israel, Kadosh. When we look at him and go, the only word that can explain it is Kadosh. My Kadosh one would be Kadoshi. When he looks at Israel, who listens to his words and does them, he says, Kadoshi, my Kadosh one. So for us to regard his words, his decrees and statutes, is in the Torah. We want to be his people so that when he sees us, that's his expression. And I know there's a certain doctrine that says, no, look, if you're in Christ, he sees Christ, and so when he sees you, he sees Christ, and so it's all good. We're not even addressing that. We are trying to read these words and play into what they express. And if your doctrine tells you something different, that's for the people who want to argue doctrine. We're not trying to talk about doctrine. We're trying to talk about, when I see these words and I understand what they say, my heart wants to respond by doing what he said.
Right.
And this is what Malachi is talking about. And if this is the last matter that he addressed before the New Testament came to be its own thing, then there's something significant about it. You know, he could have said, now you guys remember, your obligation is to do these instructions until the Messiah comes, and then don't worry about it anymore. He didn't say that. What he said was, remember. And that means that word zakar,
Zakar.
remember, means to recall to mind, to commemorate, to readdress, to keep it in your mind, in your memory. Okay, that's what we're doing.
You said the voice of the bride, and where I got that title from is in Jeremiah, where it talk, and in Revelations, where Jeremiah 13:33 or 33:13, but it says, "The voice of the bride and the voice of the bridegroom shall be heard no more." But in the previous chapter, it says that the voice of the bride and the voice of the bridegroom were heard with joy and gladness, and so there was this great celebration, and then they're heard no more, the voice of the bride and the voice of the bridegroom. And in my understanding, I'm thinking, well, first of all, remember the spirit and the bride, or the ruach, and the bride say, "Come, bo." So I'm thinking about this union, and I'm thinking about the initiation of communication and how communication is established, and just how important communication is. And in any relationship, if there's no communication, then there really is no relationship. I mean, I have many elements and objects inside my home, and I don't necessarily have a relationship with them until I'm actually using it and it's being used for what it was created to be used for. For example, my stove, I mean, it could be sitting there and it's an inanimate object because I'm not using it at this moment. But if I were to go use it, then I would have a working relationship with my stove. So in order to have a working relationship with people, there has to be a dialogue. There has to be a form of communication, and we hope that communication is healthy. So before we could even go into the origins of language, I thought it was extremely important to establish what it means. You said several times that in Malachi, it is speaking about the voice of the bride and what it means to be the voice of the bride. It means to communicate about his heart, to communicate with him, about him, and that in return, he hears and he responds to that and says, well, if you're making me famous, I'm going to make you famous. I shall place a crown upon your head, and I shall call you Kadoshi, because our communication is Kadosh. It is set apart. And you're in that set apart place. We have dialogue that is kadosh. We have dialogue that has been set apart for just me and you. And you speak about the things in my heart, and I shall speak about you. And I shall sing songs of deliverance over you. And I shall whirl around you and whirl about you. And I shall dance about you. And you shall dance about me, and we shall be joined together, and our hearts shall be equally yoked and lined up. And you shall be like me, and I shall be like you. In the book of Revelations, it says that when he returns, those who overcome the great deception that Yahuwah institutes, by the way, not the evil one, but it says that Yahuwah sends forth a strong delusion, and that some will succumb to it, and it's those who love not the truth. But it says ultimately that when he returns, that we will know him because we shall be like him. So I'm thinking, well, wait a second. If all things began with a word, or the frequency of his debar, his word, and Yahuwah spoke through the creative forces of his ruach, then there had to be a recipient. What was that recipient? Who heard? What heard? What received what Yahuwah was speaking in order for it to be expressed and become or come into existence, right? Then that's the bride. The bride is I'm going to show you. We're going to get into that right now as we get into our study. But I'm going to show you that the Ruach and the bride say, "Come." We, as we join together with the Ruach, who is our translator, our instructor, our teacher, the breath of life that resides in us, is to bring forth the issues of Yahuwah's heart, or the matters of his heart, to bring forth that which pertains to him. And I believe that the Ruach, the one of the many functions of the Ruach, is to help translate what is set apart, what is kadosh, to something that is not. We, in our former existence, were profane. We were not set apart. And so now the Ruach inspires us to hear, not only hear, but to do. And what do you think, Eric? Do you think Noah knew or had ever seen an ark before? Was it not said of Noah that he was righteous before Yahuwah, and then Yahuwah gave him the pattern of salvation, or he gave them the pattern of the ark, and it took him 120, I think 120 years to actually produce what he had heard. So first he heard Yahuwah speak. Yahuwah said, and these are the measurements, and this is the depth and the height and the width and the and this is the degree in which you shall bend the wood, and what type of wood. And so there was an entire pattern that was given by hearing. Yahuwah didn't write it down in some blueprint. He gave him the instructions, and then Noah had to intelligently hear, or had to connect, and he had to understand what he was hearing in order to produce it. I don't know much about carpentry, but I know that if there was one thing off, I know you're building something right now, and I know that your time was extended yesterday because something was off, and so you had to go back and redo it. So I know enough to say that if that ark wasn't built exactly to code or to specifications, then the water could have seeped in. There could have been great damage. I don't know how much damage could have been caused, but I'm thinking it wouldn't have they wouldn't have succeeded.
Well, you mentioned, Jessica, a couple different things that were bringing up a concept here. One is that in order to speak, there has to be a hearer, because that's what it means to create a sound. We mentioned last talk, about a definition of a sound is that which is received and heard, not necessarily that which is generated. So then you talk about the fact that Noah heard an instruction and started working. A number of times, different chapters start off with a certain prophet or certain man, that the word of Yahuwah came to that person, and then they responded. And so if you read that, it's like, well, what did that look like? How did that happen? Did they have a dream? Was there an angelic visitation? Did something just impress their mind or their spirit? It doesn't really tell us, but somehow this word comes to people. And quite a few times in the Old Testament, especially, it talks about that. So you were mentioning the other day how when Yahuwah first spoke, it came when he said, Yehi or, let there be light, it came after the Ruach was already, then the word merechefet literally means fluttering or hovering or vibrating or sending out frequencies. So somehow what you're describing here, you mentioned about you speaking to your stove. Well, you can't have a relationship with your stove unless you go to turn on the burners and cook something. But you could yell at your stove if it wasn't behaving properly, and your stove's not going to respond. But in a way, you're talking about the voice of the bride. But in the very beginning, when Yahuwah spoke, the bride per se wasn't there. All that was there was creation. And so when he's speaking in the beginning of Genesis there, Bereshit, he's not speaking to the bride, but what he's doing is he is first sending the Ruach to hover, to fluctuate, to vibrate, to send out frequencies of electromagnetic pulses, you might say, which later that same matter becomes the body of Adam, which then becomes Adam and Hua, and then he speaks, or he breathes into him the breath of life, and then he speaks into him Peru Urivu, these Hebrew words. So somehow, for him to first create matter as a receptacle and then speak words which affect that receptacle is what we're talking about here at a level of physics, at a level of going beyond what we think of as language. But what's really happening here is that in Genesis chapter 1, Yahuwah is designing the universe itself to be able to be the receptacle or the responder to his words. And so, even at a level of atoms and molecules and electrons and protons, we are designed to respond to the words of Yahuwah even without consciousness. And then once he makes Adam and gives him consciousness, that's a whole nother level of how we can respond to these words, have that relationship at a whole different level than even the physical matter does.
Right, and I'm glad you brought this up because this is where we were going to start in our study. So yesterday, Eric and I were hashing over this and a little bit this morning, and I brought to his attention in Genesis 1:3, we were actually going to start with the origin of language being established in Genesis 11:6. But as I began to think, I said, you know what? No, that's language. Before we can understand the structure of language, we first have to understand the workings of communication as a whole. That in Genesis 1:3, it says, and Yahuwah said, that word there is amar. And Yahuwah said, that word amar means to command or to order, as in order of words that create a sentence. So Yahuwah ordered, he commanded, he gave thought. And specifically, I looked it up in the Red Book. When I say Red Book, I'm talking about Klein's Etymological Dictionary. So here in the Red Book, this word is the Aleph Mem Resh, Amar, said, Yahuwah said, and it means he said in his heart or in thought, and then it was induced. So it says here, that he induced it. So first it was something that was inspired in his heart, then in thought, which is basically the same. Heart and mind are the same faculty. And so it was something that he considered, and then it was induced or it was brought forth. But what I brought up yesterday to Eric was that in the beginning, Yahuwah created. So how did he create? How was everything fashioned and formed? Well, it was through this line of communication. It says that he spoke. But let's move on a little bit more. Let's go to Genesis now 1:3. We'll read that here. And Yahuwah said, let there be light. And there was light. And then he saw that that light was tov, it was good. And then Yahuwah divided that light from the darkness. And then he named it, right? Okay. Right before that, in Genesis 1:2, it says that the earth was without form and void, tohu vabohu, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the ruach of Yahuwah moved upon the face of the waters. Now, this is where I began to think. I said, wait. Something had to happen. It came to my mind. I took communications in college and I understand a little bit. And I know that in order to have effective communication, you can actually have someone there. I'm a counselor as well, and you can have someone sitting there. You can have someone sharing in your space. But if they're not listening, you're not communicating. If you're not listening, you're not effectively communicating. You're not hearing. So there are a few elements that are required in effective communication. A, you have to speak, you have to know what you're saying, and then you have to be heard, and vice versa. So I said, if Yahuwah was speaking, then he had to be heard. What heard? So then I found that verse, Genesis 1:2, verse 2, where it says, first, before he amar, before he said, before he spoke anything, the ruach moved. I used both the Strong's as well as the Red Book, the Klein's book. That word there is rahaf, and it means to flutter or to shake or to vibrate or to move or to quicken. So I'm thinking quicken. Well, the word comes and it quickens. The word tells us that it is alive and quickens the man or the hearer. So I said, well, in order for something to be revived or quickened, or in order for vibrations to go forth, there has to be something that is obscure or dead or in need of quickening. So I began to excavate these words here in Genesis 1, verse 2. And of course, we know the word bohu, which means an emptiness or to be void. And then that word without form is tohu, which means to lie in waste or desolation. But the word that I found was darkness. And it says, and the earth was without form and without void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. Well, that word darkness is chosech. And both in Strong's, in the BDB, as well as the Red Book, it means a few things. It means ignorance, it means obscurity, it means wickedness, but it also means death. Not like demuth, but it means death. It means in a state of unknowing, or in a state of ignorance, or in a state of sorrow, or in a state of destruction or obscurity. So I'm thinking, okay, that makes sense. The Ruach first has to go forth, and it quickens or stimulates the environment. Eric brought up the idea of plasma, which I'll let Eric explain in just a minute. But I just want to first give you this visual here, that the Ruach first goes forth, and then the word followed, the command. So the way I understand it is that the Ruach is the receiver of the word of Yahuwah. The Ruach, the breath of Yahuwah, first the frequencies, the vibration, in order to capture, in order to manifest or make known what has been spoken. And that's why I said earlier that I believe the Ruach has been given to us, restored to us, the breath, in order to translate. Now, I want you to explain, if you can, the 3D printer and how you tied that in, and how matter and liquid and everything that you explained on that level, if you can, in just a second. But I do want to finish with this. When I was in college, I had to take math, and math was a very difficult subject for me. So I waited until all my other courses were finished and complete so I could focus on this one subject. And I remember going into class, and again, it was a very difficult subject for me. And sometimes I was so pushed to the brink where I would melt down and cry and kick and scream and say, I can't go back. I don't understand all this language. And one day I went into class, and I was sitting there, and I don't know if you remember, but in math, all the walls of the classroom are used, and they're filled up with whiteboards. On the left, on the right, in front of you, and behind you, there's a bunch of whiteboards. And I remember walking into class one day, and my professor, he used, the colored markers, the red, the blue, the green, the black, and all the walls were filled with this writing, different colors, red, blue, green, yellow, and, and all these, and it was so overwhelming. I'm sitting there thinking, I have no clue what any of this says. There's these numbers and letters and numbers and, different symbols and such. And I'm sitting there, and I was so overwhelmed, and I began to pray. I said, Abba, you have to help me understand. I don't understand any of this. I'm going to fail if I don't understand. And so this revelation came to me. My teacher now comes to class, and he stands before the whiteboard, and he says, all right, today this is what we're going to go and study, and this is what we're going to review, and so forth and so on. And as he's sitting there, there's this revelation I receive. I said, oh my gosh, I don't understand math because it's a language. I was doing it wrong. I was trying to understand the problem and therefore find the solution to the problem. But in fact, there's a language. That math is a language. And I need to understand the language in order to understand the problem and therefore find the solution. And the only way that I'm going to understand the language is if my professor effectively translates it to me. He has to teach me the language of mathematics. Right there, I understood the Ruach works the same as that teacher. The Ruach abides in us to help us understand the language, to translate it to us so that we can not only see the problem but find the solution. So I said life and death, there it is. The teacher, the Ruach acts as the teacher or the translator, the one who stands, that mediates between life and death, because his word, his language is life. And if we were born in Adam, then we were born in obscurity, tohu babohu, darkness. We were born in ignorance, in destruction, in death, in sorrow, in wickedness, in obscurity. And the word was hidden from us. But the Ruach has been imparted or given to us because of the propitiation of Moshiach, and therefore is now able to translate life to death. and quicken us and stimulate us so that now the word can be sown into us. The word says sown into iniquity brought forth in righteousness. And so it's sown into corruption, brought forth in incorruption. And so we see then the word must be sown in us. Before we go on to discovering or revealing that word, ruach, I want Eric to share. Eric, can you share with our audience what you shared with me yesterday? And you said it was very similar to a 3D projector or a 3D printer?
Yes, what a 3D printer is. Many years ago, I saw one that somebody was using. They have a new generation of them nowadays, but there was a vat of a liquid. It was similar to a molten plastic, and they described that there were three. You might call them guns that when they triangulate on a certain spot, a point within the volume of this liquid, they cause it to congeal and become hardened. And so, at a microscopic level, controlled by computer, they can move through this liquid and cause this object to take a shape, which then you can basically, when it's finished, reach in and pull out of the liquid of this plastic a hardened object. How do you get solid matter pulled right out of the middle of this vat of liquid? It's because these three guns triangulate or focus their beams right on a certain spot. And when all three come together, they cause the liquid to become solid.
Mm.
So out of the middle of this matter, liquid matter, which is void of a shape, pulls out a shape. That same concept is similar to what's going on in Genesis chapter 1. If you want to just look at these first couple verses for a moment, there are different regards of what this means. You could read it as just a narrative saying, okay, we're talking about the beginning, it's dark. He then says there's light, and then he separates water from water. Okay, that's a story, a narrative of what's happening. And certainly, I'm not trying to take away from that. That's one level of how to read it. But there's another level. If you read that tovu bohu literally means something has no shape, well, you could look at the vat of liquid and saying it doesn't have a shape. It has to
Plasma.
be a solid to have a shape. Well, there's four states of matter. There's solid, liquid, gas, and the fourth state is actually plasma,
Right.
which is essentially unassigned electrons. The nebulas in outer space, according to one understanding, scientific description, is that it's not a gas, it's actually plasma, which is, say, just a bunch of electrons which are not designated to form matter, electrons. Well, if you back up and say, what's an electron? Well, it's got a negative charge, and a proton is a positive charge, but it's not good and bad like positive,
Right.
negative. It's electricity. It's just they use the terms, they could have said A and B or black and white. It's just a distinction between two different types, not that one's any better than the other.
Right.
So if you could look back and say, well, in the very beginning, what Elohim did was simply put there this notion of charge, two different types of charge, but they hadn't formed any matter yet. They were just there in existence. And then when the Ruach of Elohim mirachefeted or fluttered or vibrated, he actually generated motion. Well,
Right.
electromagnetism is actually a movement, you could call it a flow or a charge, like a sine wave pattern. He got things stirred up, and then when Yahuwah said, Yehi or let there be light, he actually put things into a designation or into a form. Plasma is without form. So he took what was formless and without a shape and started organizing it. That's the first thing he did, was organizing what was simply a charge, you might say a static charge. So too, going back to what you're saying, for him to create humans, they're just an object made out of clay. He then breathes and gives life, where you breathe in, you breathe out. So now you're animated, but you have no consciousness. And then he speaks Hebrew and organizes the brain into processing. So the same way he made Adam is a parallel, like a fractal model of what he did in the very beginning of Genesis 1, of the way he created the universe. Everything that he made has a parallel system. It's kind of like the idea of what's called concentric circles, which is a target where everything like ripples that you throw a rock in a pond and the ripples go out around a certain center point. Those are concentric, they have the same center. So, too, if we see what Yahweh has made in one place and then reads what he has made in another place, we'll find that the patterns are similar, though the story reads differently. So, part of understanding the language is understanding the system of what he has done. And if we
Right.
say, if we don't hear Shema, if we don't hear his voice, we are alive, but we're really not alive yet. We're like this tohu vebohu, dead, ignorant, dark, depressed. This word chosek means without the benefit of insight or life or vitality or vibrancy, which we get upon the command of his voice. So
Right.
somehow what he created was being, and then movement, and then organization of that movement, and then relationship. So the whole idea of going
Mm.
back and hearing his voice is to gain the benefit of, you might say, the whole reason why the universe exists is not just being, but engaging because of words or through using words. We are here at the pinnacle of creation, words responding with words.
Amen. I love that. Yeah. That word or, when you brought it up, that word or actually does mean order. It means to place something in order. And we know, again, that there is a sequence of events that are taking place here that's absolutely fundamentally important in regards to healthy communication. There's a symbiosis taking place here. To have a symbiotic relationship, there has to be a speaker or an oracle or a mouthpiece, as well as a hearer or someone to respond. So it's not just having something present, like Eric said, but it's having engaging with, an interaction with, and so therefore producing exactly what it was created to be. Now, I can only imagine if I used my stove as a refrigerator, it would be nullified, ineffective, and that is wicked. That's what we don't understand, is that that stove has a purpose. I have a purpose. You have a purpose. We have a purpose as a whole. And if we are not fulfilling our purpose, then we are in violation of why we were the Torah, or the very pattern in which we were created, which is a pattern of righteousness. And again, you talked about this segment of words, and when we understand that word debar and what it means to speak or to communicate or to debar, the word, it is a segment of words that form together to complete a sentence or to create a sentence, which is the origin, which is the tolda, or the source of communication. And we don't only use words to communicate. You can not communicate. There are many forms of communication, but for our sake and for this series, we're going to focus specifically on language and how language is used in order to communicate and what it means to Yahuwah, the language. And so we have a few minutes here. What I want to discuss, now that we are discussing the voice of Yahuwah, is the Ruach and the influence of the Ruach. And so I know in the past we understood that word Ruach as spirit. But that word spirit, if we can, do our best to forget that word, to just lay it down, because that word spirit primarily belongs to Western culture. It's a Western ideology or a bad rendition of the word ruach. In the Greek, the word that's used is pneuma, and in the Latin, the word is spiritus. And I think even in the Germanic, it's Geist, or where we get the word ghost, the Holy Ghost. So I think we've used those terms in the past. We've used the Holy Spirit. We've used Spiritu, which is Catholics or the RCC would use. We've used the Holy Ghost. These, again, were conceived as antithesis to matter and body. So it's important that we just, for this cause, that we just lay those down for a second. Because if we don't, then we're going to continue to latch on to the idea that there is something, that this spirit or the spiritus or the ghost is something immaterial. And like Eric explained, It's really kind of similar to a liquid flowing and becoming a matter or becoming solid. So there is a transition here. And whether we're talking Greek or Latin or German or English, we know that we can see here in Genesis that it's by the Ruach of Yahuwah that all things were created. And this is a supernatural event. This is not a natural event that occurred. And if we understand Hebraically or in the Hebrew, and we speak about Yahuwah's Ruach, what we're basically saying is that in the beginning, Yahuwah was a tempest. He was a storm or a force, both in body and soul, both in the creation of humanity and nature. There was this vigorating force. So it's not something that we can dissociate from, that's disembodied, but we're saying no, that basically the breath of Yahuwah that carries the tone, the syntax, the frequency, the energy of the bar of his creative word, that word that has the authority and the power to cause something to exist, to be. And that's where we are going to go into. If you stay tuned, next week, what we'll do is we'll go a little deeper into the idea that by his Ruach, his word is established or received, and then we will unveil or uncover or reveal what it means to be a prophet. Let me just say, and Eric, you can close us out, but let me just say again, I'll reiterate, the first instance of communication is established in Bereshit when Yahuwah spoke the world as it was into existence, or caused disorder to become order, or caused it to be. In Psalm 33, verses 8 through 9, the psalmist says, "Let all the earth fear Yahuwah. Let all the inhabitants of the world stand in awe of him. For he spoke, and it came to be. He commanded," that's that word Amar, "and it stood fast." So if Yahuwah spoke, then what does this form of communication look like? And how do we hear when Yahuwah speaks? Does he speak the same today as he did yesterday? That's what we're going to examine in next week's show. We're going to find out various ways in which he does speak and how we were given the ability to hear and to communicate with him, even as the prophets did.
Well, real quick, we've only got like 2 minutes here. Let me just say the word prophet is spelled Nun Bet Yod Aleph. The word Bet Aleph means to come or arrive, and Nun is to engage. So when you say that he spoke, for him to put something into action is a Nun. For it to take on matter or object form is the letter Bet. And then that which he had commanded, which was that which was in his heart and his mind, which he put into the form, is Aleph. So you could see right in your phrase there that he spoke and it came to be. What's the it that came to be? The Aleph. What does it mean to come to be? The Bet. For him to speak, which is to cause, is the letter Nun. So the word for prophet right there is a word which embodies that whole sentence that you just mentioned in Psalm 33:8. And so when it says the word of Elohim came to so and so, that's the word Navah. And when you said Bo, Ruach HaKodesh, that word Bet Aleph is that same word. And when you said in the very beginning of the show, Baruch haba b'shem Yahweh, that word haba is to arrive or to blessed is he who embodies the Aleph, who does, who sees it, who it materializes in his heart, in his consciousness, and he comes alive. Blessed is the one who can hear this language, who it
Who is
comes alive.
alive.
And so
Blessed is the one who is alive in his name.
so just like you said that mathematics had to become in your comprehension its own language,
Yes.
music is a language.
Right.
This Hebrew also is the same type of language. If you're just
Yes.
learning words, you don't quite see it. If you're just memorizing definitions, you don't see it. But when these letters come alive, the same way colors form art, or the same way that words or that notes cause a song, or that words speak this language, it's not the language, it's the Ruach. This is the heart of Yahuwah that's expressed in these letters. It takes on a whole different life.
Hallelujah. All right, well, that's it for this week's show. Be sure to tune in to next week when we discuss what it is to be a prophet and how to function in his word, even as Avraham was called a prophet because the word of Yahuwah came to him and spoke. So we too want to hear the word. Zakar, remember the words of Yahushua, and he said unto them, Take nothing for your journey, neither staves nor scrip, neither bread nor money, because Yahuwah Elohim Amcham, Yahuwah is with you.
Ivarechecha Yahuwah.
Shalom.
Thank you for your generous donations to Messianic Lamb Radio. You will be blessed, as promised in Proverbs 22, verse 9. These donations enable listeners from around the world to hear words of hope in teachings and in songs. Toda Rabbah.
This is Mark David Smith, the executive producer and owner of Lamb Radio. It is the opinion here at Lamb Radio that the Messianic movement is long over. Hallelujah. One of the definitions of the word movement is a group of people with a common ideology who try together to achieve certain general goals, and we do believe this definition is very accurate. On the other hand, we also believe this goal has been achieved and is now a lifestyle. A lifestyle that was established 2,000 years ago, lost its momentum, and was reestablished early in the last century. That Messianic lifestyle, as it was in Yeshua's time, is, of course, as relative to its time as it is to our time. Lamb Radio seeks to bring to the forefront the lifestyles of Messianic believers from around the world and help establish the Messianic lifestyles of our time as our children learn the ways of Torah, a lifestyle with hope. There have been many great teachers who have gone before us, making the way for a new generation of teachers, believers, and communities. From that, we now have Lamb Radio, a place where these new teachers, believers, and communities can congregate to help set up and continue this lifestyle. The Messianic Lifestyle audio magazine broadcast, Lamb Radio, at MessianicLambRadio.com proclaims Yeshua as Messiah and the Lamb of God through songs of praise and worship, along with inspirational live talk shows that promote the lifestyle Yeshua teaches from the Torah. Be part of his lifestyle, which is now firmly planted within the nations, rejoicing in his redemptive work as we wait for our Messiah to return as the King of all kings. Thank you for listening to the Messianic Lifestyle audio magazine broadcast, Lamb Radio, a lifestyle with hope.